This is the second 10-minute deep dive on this infographic mapping the banking model of classroom learning. In part one, I challenge schools to produce not just good students, but also agents of learning by using trust as classroom currency. At the same time, teachers become agents of emotional development and partner with the other adults in this child or teen's life to support mental health in the school years. Trust becomes the currency when there are long chains of caregiving. This is the invisible hand of relationships, from preschool daycare workers, bus drivers, parents, of course, and everyone this child or teen encounters at school over many years. Caregiving is the typical of the reciprocal back and forth of trust. So keep in mind that if the value of the bus driver is diminished, then so is the trust we have in kids being delivered safely to school. If the value of a teacher is diminished, then so is the trust that we have in the patience and compassion necessary to produce mental health in kids. So I'm warning that when caregiving is devalued, then trust is devalued. Valuing caregiving should not be overlooked because early relational investment is a living bridge to the future success of each student. This is the invisible hand of relational capital, created by long chains of trustworthy relationships in daily interactions. I believe this is a way to restate what Carol Anne Hilton says about economic future pacing in her book, Indigenomics. Great classrooms effectively employ a relational economy based on setting the economic future pace of the good person a student is striving to become, and every teacher is striving to become. The challenge is to look at each person with a future perspective, while at the same time avoid falling for a deficit narrative. An inclusive perspective is necessary, so each child or teen is welcome to take part in whatever they can right now, as we all wait patiently for development to work its magic. In fact, radical inclusion is the unspoken goal. When we cannot practice radical inclusion, we will fail to be a teacher. Just as a banker or entrepreneur will fail if they do not meet individual needs of clients or customers. Bankers would never say, I sell one investment product, so you'll have to settle for this or go somewhere else to invest your money. So teachers should never say, you don't fit in here, go to school somewhere else. And yet, isn't this the takeaway message to families when schools don't break cycles of bullying, failing grades, and repeated discipline, and worse, that suspensions or expulsions are accepted tools of no tolerance? So let me walk this back. When kids are not becoming agents of learning and teachers are not becoming agents of development, then trust is not the currency. But what other currency could there be besides trust? Unfortunately, whole schools or single classrooms can get stuck in piggy bank transactional thinking. Recognition becomes the currency. The piggy bank model is essentially a barter system. Kids earn recognition for good behavior and pay a debt for unacceptable behavior through consequences. But like fiat money, recognition given by one teacher is not easily transferable to other teachers or other classes. In highly transactional classrooms, trust is missing. So the teacher has to assume more control. They feel responsible to use rewards and consequences to manage and motivate kids. Piggy bank thinking is basically money in and money out thinking, serving only a training function. This is a transactional way to get compliance, but it requires very close surveillance to maximize opportunities to catch kids being good. When kids rely on recognition to participate, their individuality becomes invisible. Cultural knowledge is unimportant. So self-worth is impacted in the most negative ways possible, undermining agency for learning. And without personal agency, kids will need constant reassurance. Students who are not agents of learning will often say, am I doing this right? What do I do next? I don't know what to do. I can't do this. When teachers believe they need to control kids, it's because they have bought into a form of pop behaviorism, which has long been debunked by psychology as the most dismal view of human potential. Very often, behaviorism reinforces passive kids. Think about it. When kids are controlled and directed too much, they will do only what they're told to do, or they stop listening and only do what they want to do, or don't do much at all to avoid getting into trouble. Unfortunately, pop behaviorism has new energy because control in classrooms has recently been gamified. You know what I mean if you are familiar with ClassDojo software, awarding points for good behavior and participation in class. ClassDojo is used in over 70% of Canadian classrooms and 95% of elementary classes in the US. Research on the effectiveness of ClassDojo reports a short-lived novelty effect, which decreases disruptive behavior in class, but this is followed by longer-term negative attitudes toward the teacher or toward the subject content or the classroom setting. It's easy to predict that anxious kids get more anxious when ClassDojo is used, and anxious kids will try to avoid school altogether by staying home more often. The bottom line for me is that misbehavior is normal, so it is not possible to have no misbehavior in classrooms. But also, when teachers struggle too much with misbehavior, then more relational approaches are needed, not less, not digital surveillance to get better at catching kids being bad. There are only two routes to keeping kids focused, productive, and on task. One is personal interest from the student themselves. The second is interest ignited by an innovative and passionate teacher. Think about it. Continuous pressure to be good and be productive is crazy difficult even for adults. Constant surveillance causes any of us to be more anxious. Pressure in classrooms every day for kids to comply and achieve pushes kids to become less patient, less trusting, less confident, and also more irritable and more competitive. Plus, with close surveillance, students' frustration is pushed underground, and we adults have then unwittingly promoted shadow banking. Shadow banking is the outcome when recognition is the currency. Not because teachers don't care, teachers do care, but caring is not enough. Caring about misbehavior or lack of achievement is not the same as compassion for the reasons behind those problems. Kids always fall through the gaps when we simply don't see their problems and don't understand their world. Teachers who become agents of emotional development will tap into their compassion to come alongside this child or teen and witness what they're going through. Compassion is the key to trace backwards the invisible hand of caregiving, to see where relationships are breaking down. Compassion avoids shadow banking, but compassion is built on trust, not recognition. It is so true that the more trust you invest, the more dividends are paid in return. In contrast, the more recognition we get, the more we feel entitled to have. Like money, the more you have, the more you want and feel entitled to more. So like fame, it can be too tempting to turn down recognition we didn't earn. When kids are focused on more recognition, higher marks, the next big award, or more praise from the teacher, they can become disconnected from their own learning power. I'm not saying never recognize achievement with praise or awards, but I am saying use these very sparingly, because otherwise shadow banking is the result. If students focus on recognition, they will find ways to unlevel the playing field. Cheating is a symptom of shadow banking. So is bullying, competition for attention, using put downs and insults, name calling, excluding peers from play groups, or refusing to partner with certain kids for school projects. And Nell Nodding, that American education philosopher, warns us, all students should understand what might happen to their moral thinking in times of great stress. Children are not to blame for shadow banking. We adults are to blame. Piggy bank thinking may well be that seed money for not enoughness, or that endless pursuit adults can feel for more money, more status, and more recognition to validate their self-esteem. Transactional classrooms rely too much on recognition, creating shadow banking, which has long-lasting negative impacts on emotional maturity. While on the other hand, relational classrooms rely on trust, creating wealth assets in student mental health and emotional development. Emotional development is my favorite topic.